welcome to Tech Talks, the People and Planet podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tamara Miner, the Director of Engineering at Climate Policy Radar. Hi, Tam. How's it going?
Hi, Lee. Very, very well. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be a really interesting one. You've not long joined Climate Policy Radar, so it's going to be great to explore how you found it so far, but also your experience and your kind of wider insight into that industry. Why don't you start, though, by explaining what Climate Policy Radar does, the mission that you guys are on? I think that would be important.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. And yeah, so I've only been at Climate Policy Radar for a little over 2 months, but it was founded about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And the mission is really to organize, analyze, and democratize data on global climate laws and policies. So obviously, those are crucial for climate action and things to actually move the needle. And unfortunately, the data on climate laws and policies are really hard to find, and also it's a bit of a scale problem where there's just such a vast amount of information out there that even if you have access to that information, then how do you actually dig through it and actually get the information out that you need? And so our goal is really to be the world's largest database of climate law and policy and things like UN submissions and stuff like that. And we use a variety of data science and machine learning and technology tools to make the documents within that database as accessible and easy to analyze as possible.
And you guys are a non-profit as well, I think, aren't you?
Yes, we are.
Okay, cool. So how do people access this information usually then? Just kind of online?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to research. Like our initial database of climate laws actually came from LSE, where our founder had created this very, very large database of those PDFs, essentially. And so it started with that, and then over time we've been expanding that. And I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but we have plans to expand that even further. So.
Okay, cool. So what's the product look like then? How does it work to solve the problem?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, first of all, I would say we're open source, so that's really important for our mission to like the democratization aspect of it, to make sure that access is available and we're able to promote climate justice, especially for folks who aren't necessarily able to have the resources to access that. So there's that, and that really helps provide a springboard for innovation, just, I mean, as open source does in general, and really helping with research efforts and collaborating across partnerships. And then, sorry about the product itself. So I'll get into that a little bit more. I mentioned the scale problem. So in order to make decisions on climate action, you have to really look at those things at every level. So local, global, et cetera. The information requirements for that are really quite overwhelming. So we're using AI and machine learning to actually enable us and our users to really quickly look at huge amounts of data. So we're talking thousands and thousands of documents, which may be, up to 100, or I think our largest document is like 1,200 pages or something like that. So imagine doing like Control F and finding data in there. Like, that would suck for each of that if you have to do research across thousands or hundreds of documents. One example being, if you're a government and you're trying to figure out, if certain corporations within your jurisdiction are hitting their climate action targets, like let's say net zero or something, you need a database that has those targets, and you also need to know what the climate laws and policies are, so that you can match them and see how do these things, how are we measuring up against this. And so one example of a customer might be that national government. So normally that would take a whole team of researchers, weeks or months to do manually. So our product really enables that to by harnessing AI, it enables like one researcher to do it in a few hours or less, depending on the task.
Awesome. Okay. So to be clear then, your customers might be governments, anyone else that might get involved with this?
Yeah, so governments, policymakers. So when I say governments, it's like legislators, but also any research behind that, or like in the U.S., there's the EPA.
Yeah.
So that's like a different organization. The UN, which we're partnered with them, but they also use our stuff. Actually, we're part of a Sustainable Ventures cohort, and we have other people within that, or other organizations within that cohort that are also using us. So yeah, and that group is ever growing. I think we have like several 100,000 customers at this point, so it's quite large.
Wow, that's incredible.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm interested in your background as well. We said at the start of the show that you've only just joined a couple of months ago. You are director of engineering. What's your background? What does your role involve now?
Yeah, so I started my career out in infrastructure and working in data centers like nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was more recently a VP of engineering and a strategy advisor. Most of my career has been working in either SaaS products, so developer tools, or video games and entertainment. So you might be thinking, well, that's a big switch. So I have a bit of a weird career background, but there's a lot of transferable things there, right? So in looking at a lot of the dev tools products that I worked on, they're highly scalable distributed systems. Same thing with games, all highly scalable distributed systems. And in most cases, it were moving a lot of data around. So there's a lot of similar considerations there. And also the customer focus aspect. So we're very user centric at CPR. And a lot of my previous roles have also been very user focused. And also, I've been in engineering leadership for the last 6 to 8 years, and a lot of that focus has been, becoming an empathy focused leader. So obviously that is directly transferable to being a director of engineering. And then, I worked in games and entertainment before this, which is great. And, there's nothing wrong with that. Kind of got a lot of us through the pandemic. But I really wanted to move into tech for good, as I wanted something a bit more fulfilling. So I'm sure you understand that, as you work in the tech for good space as well. So
Absolutely, I do, and it's interesting speaking to similar people in your position, and they all do it for those reasons as well. And lots of those people listen to the show actually. So it's an interesting transition from that background into a tech for good space where it's still very, very user centric though. And I think that was the key thing that I took out of that.
yeah, user centric. And I think, like, if there's parallels with the technology, right? Because there's a lot of tech for good there's tons of different types of tech for good products. So I think for me, it was really important finding something that's going to be really interesting and innovative, which, obviously with the AI element that CPR has, it's very much around that. So
absolutely. So what's your remit now then? What's going on with your role? You've obviously been brought in for a specific reason.
Yeah, I guess one big one is the team's growing. So that's a very exciting aspect of it. And also it's just an exciting time because not only we're growing the team, but we just got some new funding in, which is part of how that's enabled. And we're also focusing on expanding our scope. And that means we're going to be adding like corporate disclosures to that data set. So that way, the example I was talking about earlier of how do you actually measure up these policies to what a corporation is doing, that will be easier. And we're developing some other tools to really dig into the data. So we're doing a lot with generative AI right now. It's pretty exciting. Can
you share a little bit more about how that would work at this stage?
Sure. So we're actually as part of actually a google.org, which is like the philanthropic arm of Google. We're working with a cohort there on generative AI. So we're experimenting a bit with RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, and that really centers around ensuring accuracy. And AI, I'm sure you've heard of hallucinations with AI, which is
Yeah.
something you don't want when policymakers are utilizing AI, or looking at targets and things like that of, how are we measuring up? So we're really digging into making sure that the data is accurate. We're reducing hallucinations, reducing bias in AI. So making sure we're working on the principles of responsible AI, which is pretty interesting. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And I speak to a lot of people again that are talking now about ethical and responsible AI, doing things for the right reasons, which is all for the good as well. It leads on to the next question, and uh, the climate crisis. Are we doing enough? I know this is a huge question, and we could probably do a full series on this, let alone just one question in one podcast. What are your thoughts?
For sure. I mean, I think, we could always be doing more, of course.
Yeah.
But I think like what we do know is, there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's going to solve it. Even if we find something that, a researcher's doing something in Norway and it works really well in Norway for helping reduce emissions or whatever there, that may or may not work in Kenya or some other part of the world, because which is really why the global aspect of this is really important, and looking at it from an inclusive perspective. And while we're actively seeking out partnerships, not just at the national level, but partners who generally share our ambition and our values, and we really are encouraging people to engage with us more and use our tools more. Also part of why we're open source, and we want to have feedback on how to make that better. And I think I mentioned, we work in collaboration with some really amazing partners already. So like London School of Economics, Climate Parliament, the UN Climate Organization. So like lots of different organizations that are doing a lot of good already. And as I said, we're really hoping to enable them to do more good faster. Yeah.
And you know what? It's encouraging the amount of, and I always think that doing my job in recruitment, you can get a good barometer of what's going on out there. The amount of different startups that are building teams that are actually being founded within the climate space. Your building in particular, we talked about the sustainable ventures building, where it's full of like-minded companies that are all trying to solve in one way, shape, or form the same problem.
Exactly.
So long may it continue.
Yeah, I hope so. And and it's nice that you mentioned that, because I think we will get together as a group. A couple weeks ago, we had a tech meetup there, so we're sharing. We're not the only climate startup that's using AI, and so we're able to share some of that findings, and that's where we found out that some of the other cohort members are actually using our target classifiers. So
wow.
yeah, it's really great, and may it continue.
Absolutely. Well, Tam, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Tamara Miner, this is Tamara Miner, Director of Engineering from Climate Policy Radar. Thanks again.